Hello, I'm David with Brimstone Gunsmithing, and today's video is going to be on Headspace. It is amazing to me how many people are really into firearms, and they hand load and whatever, and they have no idea what Headspace is or what difference it makes or anything like that. And so hopefully this video will help to explain some of those things. Essentially, Headspace is a description of how tightly a given round fits in a chamber. Depending on the round, different rounds have different designs. A rimmed cartridge like a 22 or 38 special, that kind of thing, it seats on the rim itself. A lot of handgun cartridges like the 45 ACP seat against the case mouth, which is kind of weird, but that's how it works. Belted magnums seat against the belt. And on bottleneck rifle cartridges, centerfire rifle cartridges like this one, it actually seats on this shoulder right here. So as the cartridge is going into the chamber, it is that shoulder that seats against a corresponding machined shoulder in the chamber, and that's what stops it from going any deeper into the barrel. That's what sets your headspace on a centerfire bottleneck rifle cartridge. So a correctly set headspace should be as the cartridge is moving into the chamber, it should be just loose enough that the bolt can move forward and the locking lugs on the bolt right here can clear the locking lugs on the receiver right here and turn, and so the bolt is locked up in place and will support the brass. That's really important. If the chamber is too loose, what happens is when the round is fired, the firing pin hits the primer and it drives the cartridge forward. It then ignites it, and this area, the neck area right here, is the first to expand, and it seals inside of the chamber. Well, then with that 60,000 pounds per square inch or whatever it is, the rest of the brass also expands, and the rear of the cartridge is driven backwards until the case head is seated against the bolt face, and the locking lugs on the bolt are seated against the locking lugs on the receiver. And if that stretching motion is too much, you can actually snap the brass. It's usually right here, and that's what's called the case head separation. And then all those superheated gases, instead of being sealed by the brass, come blasting out around the bolt and out and, destroy your gun and your face and anything else that happens to be in the vicinity. So essentially the brass is not strong enough to contain that kind of pressure, and the bolt is not an airtight seal. So the brass and the chamber work together. The chamber and the bolt support the brass, but the brass is what expands and actually seals and keeps all that pressure headed down the barrel. So headspace has got nothing to do with your cartridge overall length. As you can see by looking at this, your headspace is the distance from this shoulder to the rear of the case right there. So that's what determines how tightly this round is going to fit in the chamber. The bullet, the ogive of the bullet tip especially, these are all just hanging out here in space. And we'll talk about probably other videos about how you set your bullet jump and all that kind of stuff and what difference that makes. But that has got nothing to do with headspace. It's all about how tightly does this round fit in the chamber. Some issues that we run into with this is, we had a guy we built a rifle for, and we set a nice tight match chamber, and then he was hand loading and he was resizing the brass very radically. He was resizing it as much as he could given those dies, and he was squeezing the brass back, and he was setting the shoulder back significant distance. And so when he was shooting it, his brass was looking all weird. It was starting to stretch. He was getting signs of excessive headspace. And so we brought it back in saying, hey, you guys got this chamber too loose. And we showed him with our gauges and all how it was a perfectly tight matched chamber. And then through the discussion, We eventually were able to show him how he was reloading it and he was resizing the brass too much. So he was getting the signs of excessive headspace in his chamber, but it was because he was resizing the brass too much. The other extreme is, we run this a lot on ARs, if your chamber is too small and the brass is too big, what happens is, on a bolt action, it's not as big of a deal because there's actually surfaces cut on these lugs here on a bolt action that kind of cam the bolt forward. So even if this brass is a little bit too long and you're having to squeeze the brass a little bit to get the bolt to close, you've got some camming surfaces and you got a lot of leverage to be able to do that. And the bolt might not close smoothly, but you can do it and it's not like the end of the world or anything. On an AR, we're seeing this a lot with people that are just buying AR barrels and buying AR bolts and throwing them together. That's all cut to a standard, so oftentimes it works just fine, but there are times you end up with a chamber that's too small. So what happens is you pull the charging handle back and you let it go, and you got the momentum from the spring and the buffer, the bolt carrier group and everything scoops up around out of the magazine, and it hammers it into this chamber. And as this is coming forward, it compresses the brass. Now, this is a completely worn out bolt and barrel. That's why it was a candidate for getting cut up. But if this was too tight, what would happen is it would compress the brass and it would just start to turn a little bit, and it would stop because it's locked up. But it's still out of battery. You know, the bolt carrier is still quite a ways back. You can't fire the round. But because you've just got that little cam pin in there, you don't have the leverage that you do on a bolt action. You then can't get it out. So if that happens to you fairly regularly, you know, you let the bolt go home and it stops out of battery. You can't fire the gun, but then you can't extract the live round either. You've got too tight of a chamber. Either the rounds are too big or the chamber is too small. So maybe you're picking up here that there isn't really a standard. I mean, there is a standard, but that doesn't mean that anything is cut to that standard. There's a very large gray area. I should say a fairly large gray area of sizes. You know, a given round can be a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, depending on the manufacturer. The same can be true of the chambers, you know, depending on how it was machined, depending on if that reamer was a new reamer or was a worn reamer or whatever. You know, they cut a little bit deeper, they cut a little bit shallower. It could be any number of things. But the important thing to realize is that that doesn't make a huge amount of difference. If you're hand loading and really trying to create a accurate load for your rifle. Oh, while we're talking about that, let's explain why headspace has anything to do with accuracy. If this fits nice and tight, if this brass moves just far enough forward to allow the bolt to close, and at that point the brass is supported very securely inside the chamber, then it's going to present the bullet to the rifling the same way every time. If this chamber is really loose and it allows the brass to flop around in there, it's not going to be consistent. So that's why people want a nice tight chamber for reloading, or for accurate shooting. That's kind of the concept behind it. You got a chamber that fits more tightly. But the upshot of it is, if you have a factory chamber, whatever, you fire ammunition through it, you collect that brass is now expanded to fit this chamber relatively accurately. And as long as it didn't stretch so much that it becomes unsafe, there's nothing wrong with it, you know, and now you have brass that's sized for your chamber. So then when you reload, you want to just neck down this area while leaving this untouched. And so what I do when I'm resizing my brass is I'll unscrew the sizing die and have it way long, and then I'll just slowly start turning it down while running the cartridge up in there. And you'll turn it a little bit, run the brass up, take it out, look at it, and you'll start to see a line appear on here where it's just necking down the neck. It's making the neck smaller. And you just gradually turn it down and you'll watch that line run down. and I, get it so that it just touches the shoulder and stop. So I understand that, of course, it's going to be sizing down part of the body. That's fine, not a huge deal. But I'm not resizing this shoulder. I'm not pushing the shoulder back at all. I'm mostly just resizing the neck. That's how you're not truly neck sizing, but that's how you should set up your dies, regardless. If you fired a round from a rifle and you're reloading for that same rifle, that's how you should resize it. Even if you've got a full length sizing die, not a neck sizing die, all that means is that you're going to be squeezing down the diameter of the body while you're also squeezing down the diameter of the neck. So you might have to trim it more often, but that's fine. The important thing is you don't want to set back this shoulder. I see a lot of folks that do just that. They reef it all the way down and they end up setting back the shoulder, and you end up getting signs of excessive headspace when the chamber is correct. The rounds they have created are wrong. Again, if you've got a rimmed cartridge, like a 38 special or something like that, 22, of course you don't reload for 22, but it's a little bit easier because there is nothing you got to worry about up in here. It's just a straight walled pistol case. 45 ACP, because of that tapered case neck, and that's what it seats on, you got to get your crimp die or taper die just right in order for headspace to work out. Otherwise, it won't chamber. That's about the size of it. There's a lot more to Headspace, but that hopefully will kind of give you guys an idea in a nutshell of what it is and why it matters and kind of how it works. Again, it's just how tightly a round will fit in the chamber, which is important both for safety and for accuracy. I hope this video helped explain some stuff, makes it a little bit more clear for you. If you got any questions, let me know. And thanks for watching. Have a good day.